Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. Um, First of all, thank you very much for joining us, and taking time out from your busy schedule uh, to come and join us today. And also thanks to CUP Cambridge Education for organising this webinar. We're we're broadcasting from the Madrid office, and which is currently under renovation. So if you hear some noises, hammering, drilling, it's just the builders upstairs. Sorry about that. My name is Eoin Higgins, and we're going to talk today about process writing mainly. So we're going to take you through a possible process writing, all the different stages, and within that, we're going to offer you some ideas about how to scaffold the different parts of the writing process, and give you some techniques to help your students through that process, help them develop their ideas, help them to use the right language for the right text genre, and also hopefully to to get better results. So that's the aim of my my talk today. So using a carefully planned writing process with some different techniques for scaffolding, we can give our students a way to approach every single writing task that they have to deal with a huge variety of texts, and also engage them in the writing process, so that when it comes to writing, that they're engaged and motivated to do it, hopefully, and also by giving them help along the way and showing them different techniques, showing them different ways to do different things, the different stages of the process, our students will be more confident when it comes to writing, and we'll get better results, which as a teacher, when it comes to sitting down to correct people's writing, the results will be better, and correction will be perhaps less painful process. We know sometimes that, when you have a pile of homework in front of you, we all know what that's like. So first of all, let's have a look at some definitions of the two key concepts that we're dealing with here. So process writing involves, first of all, it's taking them away from the product. So let's just take students through a series of steps, carefully planned, and it's the same series of steps for every writing task. It doesn't matter what we're asking them to write. We can use these same steps and take them through these steps in order to produce text. And then scaffolding is a technique maybe many of you are familiar with, used particularly in bilingual education, which is taking a task and breaking it down into smaller, more manageable chunks, parts, so that and providing support for students in each of those chunks. In fact, by that definition, the idea of process writing is already a kind of scaffolding. That is, where we take the writing process, we break it down into different chunks. We're already providing some help there, and then at each phase of the process, we can help students with different techniques to generate ideas or to check their work, or whatever part it is. So the writing process is typically mapped out in a kind of linear way. And it typically involves what you're seeing on the slide here, which is the middle part and the part on the right. So the taking students through the process from thinking about what they're going to write about, planning and organizing it, and then actually sitting down to write it. So the drafting, redrafting, revising, we'll talk about that. We also, I think, need to add in a previous pre-writing stage to that, so that students are looking at model texts to give them an idea of what their writing should look like at the end. Not necessarily, we're not expecting our students to use a text like the models that we're presenting them with them. But it gives them a different, an idea of what's expected of what it should look like, the structure, the language. And I think providing models is an important stage of the process, which we often. So looking at model texts, analyzing them at different levels in terms of structure and features, and also in terms of language, which is obviously very important for second language learners. These, as I mentioned before, this is usually presented as a kind of linear structure, but actually in studies of writing foreign language learners, for example, in studies that they've done on good foreign language writers, they discovered that this stage, this writing process, is a kind of cyclical, circular thing that students will go back and revise what they did and think about it again and restructure. And so they're not just going from one stage to another. In a line, they constantly going back and rethinking things. So that's why I put in these arrows, and the thing that we did in mind as we're taking through the process. And then there are plenty of scaffolding techniques, and the four that we're going to look at today are providing models, using questions, talk time, so getting students to talk together, pair work, group work activities, and then using visual aids. As I said, the models that we're showing them are a kind of something to aim for, perhaps, or something that they at least they know what's expected of them. We use questions to lead them in a particular direction, or to focus their attention on particular aspects of a text, or on to check what they've done at the end of the process. We use talk time so that we're not just leading them along, so that they're working with each other, bouncing ideas off each other before they write, checking things together in peer assessment activities, which we'll look at later on. And then visual aids, which can help students to visualize the text in a different way. And that's, of course, very handy, very useful for students with strong visual intelligence, or visual learners, students who have a preference, let's say, for visual learning. So let's first pre-writing stage, before we sit down to start thinking text. Let's look at three different parts here. First of all, presenting them with model texts, which we'll see in a moment. Getting them to analyze these texts at different levels. Global level in terms of structure, but also sentence level, paragraph level, word level, and also language analysis, which I think we often may not pay much attention to, but asking students to look at grammar structures, the typical kinds of grammar structures that might be used, or sentence structures that might be used in a particular text, and they vary from genre to genre. So let's have a look first then at at the kind of models. So here we've got a report. It's a text about rewilding, so it's to do with environmental issues. And just even on a sort of at this level, we can see it's very small. I will read that, but just on this level, the model text presents a structure which students can look at and analyze and copy. That is, text is divided up very clearly into different sections using headings, and that's a typical feature of a report. So we're looking, asking our students to look at text structurally. This is what it should look like. We want different paragraphs, we want different headings, and as you can see, we also highlight. We can also highlight using different colors if you can, or underlining, or asking our students to use letter pens and highlight different aspects of, say, grammar, of vocabulary, punctuation, spelling, word analysis, and stuff like this. So we can take it all the way from the top, all the way from how the text is structured to word level and everything in between. Here's an example of slightly more, maybe more complicated text in terms of language. Very often, students find poetry quite difficult to deal with, and so we provide simple models with a simple enough refrain. So here, each verse has a similar structure. It begins with a sentence that says, "What a delight it is when," and then there's something. So, for example, "What a delight it is when spreading paper, I take my brush and find my hand better than I thought." So this is a simple sentence structure that we can convert into a nice verse, and that refrain, "What a delight it is when," we can ask our students to finish the sentence. So we're providing them with a model sentence, the beginning, sentence stem, which that they can then finish with their own ideas, and this model then can be used. We can change an element. We can say, okay, what about if we want to write about some pain, something we don't enjoy. So what a pain it is when, and so we provide this little sentence structure, sentence and sounds. So look at one more model story, and what we do here, we can use then different. We can ask them to focus on the model on different aspects of the text, so we can compare the text to a different kind of story. Okay, so the question here is, what makes a good description in a story, and this is then we can ask them to focus on details of the story, how to structure it, what language to use, what mood to create, etc., etc., and looking at a text and talking about how skillful writers write a story or write a poem or write a report using those models. So, and then we obviously, we want to also look at key terms, like mood or suspense or anecdote, narrator, to allow our students to talk about text and analyze them in different ways. And turning to the next step, which would be analyzing the text, we can use questions to lead our students in a certain direction. So here we have an analysis by paragraph, so we can ask questions about different paragraphs in a report, for example, the different paragraphs with our headings. We'll talk about different aspects of the theme of the report, what's under analysis. So in the first paragraph, what key information should we give, etc., etc. So this this is an autobiography, and so it's a short extract from autobiography, so that we can take them through the paragraph and ask a question, make them focus on a particular aspect of the paragraph. We can also, in text analysis, we can also, sorry, I think I skipped one. Okay, so visual aids then in the text analysis, and this is visual aids can be really, really helpful, as we said before, for more visual learners, and even simple visual aids like a table. So we take the poem that we looked at before, we take the core areas of life that the poet is dealing with, when we can use a table and ask students to analyze which verse deals with which aspect that the writer wanted to talk about. So different answers for all different verses. And then, of course, these visual aids can be used later on in the actual writing process. So students can use these same visual aids to structure their own writing later on. Let's have another look at a different one. This is a line graph here. So we can ask our students to analyze the story. We're talking here about tension and drama, and so we can use a line graph to see where the writer is increasing the suspense. Then there's a quiet moment. Then there might be another increase in the drama or the suspense, etc. We can take this line graph that we've used to analyze the structure and apply it to our own story, so that students can then generate their own ideas and organize it by increasing or decreasing the drama. Illustrations. We can, in a description, we want within a story we're describing a particular event, and we can even ask our own students to draw what they've seen, to draw a picture of what they've seen, or use an illustration that we can produce ourselves, photocopy it, or put it on on the screen, and ask our students to read the story carefully and match the different parts of the illustration with what they read in the text. Add the details to the illustration, arrows pointing to where people live or what happens in a particular area. So we have here a story about from the point of view of a slave in the United States, and the slave house, and so the description includes different parts of the farm, where people live, what they look like, and it gives students a more vivid picture of what they've read. And then, of course, they can use that simple idea of drawing an illustration, particularly good for visual learners. And then from that illustration, turn to writing and using visual aids themselves. Getting students to talk together in the analysis of the text. So we want our students to read the text closely and then put them together to do a particular task, and so that they'll be able to bounce ideas off each other, which is a much more motivating activity for them. So it's not just the teacher taking them through each part of it. They can work in pairs, and we can give them some ideas for labels for different parts of the text, and then they can work together, read through the text, and pinpoint different areas that we've asked them to look at, and they work together, sorting out doubts or helping each other with words, or discussing the different aspects of the text. And so we want to work together. In terms of then finally in this section of text analysis, looking at language and pointing out particular grammar structures. So in this case, for example, we're looking at the passive voice. Passive sentences are particularly common in particular types of text, like academic texts or essays. And so asking questions for the students to figure it out themselves. So this inductive approach to grammar, so that we're asking them to look at a particular structure and asking a question about that, so that they figure the rule out for themselves, which will help them learn the grammar structure better. And then take them back to the text and they find more examples of this grammar structure. Let's move on now to the right just before we get them to write. We want them to carefully plan, because as you know, I'm sure, um, um, planning is a crucial part of the writing process. We want them to think about what they're going to write, plan it carefully, organize it carefully before they sit down to write. And some of you who do who prepare students for exams, you know yourselves that plenty of time is given normally for say a writing paper. Um, and I always say to my students, have plenty of time to write whatever number of words you're required to write, 200, 300, 500, whatever it is. You have plenty of time. So carefully plan, and as teachers, we evaluate that. We can see when planning has been done carefully. Let's take a look at some of the parts of the planning stage, and see where we can support, where we can give those scaffolding techniques. So brainstorming obviously is the first step. We analyze the task. We give them the task. We want to be as real as possible. So we can see some examples here where there's a competition for young poets, and so we can give them an idea that we're going to enter on the competition. And the brainstorming part, I like to always start individually. Shy students, sometimes they will allow other students to kind of take the lead, especially if we do it in groups. We say, okay, give me some ideas, and we write them up on the board. That's the process. Very often as teachers, we find the same students talking all the time. So why don't we let everyone start on their own? Give them some ideas, give them a bit of time to think of some ideas for themselves, and put them together in pairs, bounce those ideas off each other, then put those pairs into small groups, get them discussing the ideas, and then we can do the whole group activity. And for students to think of ideas, it can be very difficult. We often complain that our students they don't have any imagination, or they can't think of ideas. It's very difficult. So if we allow them this carefully planned, scaffolded brainstorming session, where they think of ideas on their own, then they discuss them with their partner, and then they discuss them in a small group, and build it up that way. We'll have a lot more ideas. Or visual aids. So if they have to do a description of a place, we can ask them to draw a picture of the place first. So we're asking them to describe a place in a video game, like a sort of landscape for a video game. And we can ask them to draw it first, use their imagination to draw it, and then from that drawing, take them into the writing process. Let's move on. Questions? So obviously, getting them to discuss ideas together and use questions. Who are the main characters? What do they like? How do they stand out? How does in this case, it's a scene of a play. How does it start? What happens during the play, etc. So focus, using questions to help them focus their ideas, and same here with same idea here, where we're asking students to prepare and discuss a question, question to help them through that. Okay. And on the planning stage, we can use a visual aid like this. This is a review, so a write-up of a film, and we can say, okay, well, look at this. This is a typical structure for a review or write-up. Introduction with the basic information, details that might make the film enjoyable for you. We can point out a few flaws in the next paragraph, etc. So we use this visual aid here to map it all out, and then they can copy this structure, and that will help them plan better. And onto the actual writing stage. So we have this kind of constant sort of drafting, redrafting, remodeling, reorganizing stage. So let's look at a couple of ideas for scaffolding there. We want our students to write drafts and revise those drafts and redraft, and get those better results. Nobody, I think, not even professional writers like myself, we know nobody likes reading their own book. We do want them to do this, and so using questions and using checklists and things like that can obviously help. We're asking them in this case on the slide here that you can do a story, and so using visual aids, we can take pictures from the internet. I've used pictures of a photograph of a couple who got married or something like that, and then one of the couple is in a car, and then there's an accident, and so we can use these little stories to use these pictures to start ideas for a story, and asking them questions. So at the end of the story, we've got to the third picture there where the girl goes to school, and so using questions, asking them, how did she feel? How do you think she feels? The character that you've developed, how does she feel? How did the other people react to her? And questions help them get ideas for their story. And also use questions to get students to be revising their first draft. And the questions can be at different levels. Questions about structure, questions about organization, or questions about characters if it's a story. So here, for example, we have setting, action, dialogue, characters, scene. We can ask them questions specific and get them working together. So revising their text together. Peer assessment, I think, is a great strategy, and we don't use it enough, I think. So putting students together, revising, talking about it. We have to set some very strong ground rules. We can't just give essays to students and allow them to share them and then just let them say what they want. So here, for example, we say, write down particular things about the character that you've intended, and or we can say a simple 3, 2, 1, 3 things that you liked, 2 things that you would change, and the 1 thing that you didn't like. So very strong ground rules for peer assessment, where students are assessing each other, looking at each other's work, and also help in the development stage or redrafting stage where you've allowed the student to look at somebody else's work to get ideas from them. And then checklists at the end of the writing process, where we use questions to make sure that our students have included everything that we want them to do in the particular text genre. So at the end of the writing process, they've written the text. Now they've written the text on their own. This is an independent writing task. Now look over what you've written and answer these questions. Have you included everything you were supposed to include? So we've looked at the model. We've seen features of the text. We've seen the type of language or the type of structure or words or features of the text, and now we're asking them, did you include this? So have you created an interesting character, even at that sort of high level, and then even on sentence and word level and punctuation? Have you checked punctuation? Have you used capital letters correctly? Have you used little words? We want to use particular kind of language or particular kind of structure. So take them through those different stages. Pre-writing, that is looking at models, analyzing them, analyzing the features, analyzing the language, using different techniques with visual aids, with questions, with talk time, taking them through the next pre-writing stage, which is the planning and organizing and thinking and brainstorming. Again, the same idea, getting them to talk to each other, getting them to ask questions, or asking them questions, using visual aids to help them structure their ideas and plan and organize. and those visual aids then use them in the writing process, and then the drafting, redrafting stage, where we are taking them through the drafting of the text piece by piece. We can use questions in there, revising with each other or revising on their own, using checklists with questions, using visual aids to analyze what they've written. And at the end of that, so we've got these 4 scaffolding techniques: models, visual aids, questions, talk time, which we can then incorporate into different stages of the process, and support our students through the whole writing process, hopefully at the end of that. So I think we have some time for some questions, which I'm really looking forward. I hope I can answer them all. So here's a question from Gulam, I think is how you pronounce that. And what is he or she, I'm not sure, asks, what is the difference between thinking and planning? Which is a good question. For me, it's we've given them a task, say to write a story with an interesting character. So the thinking stage is just getting the ideas in a brainstorming process. We'll allow students to say whatever. So we'll ask them a question, what do you think the character should look like? Say whatever they like. That's just throw out some ideas, and some of them will be good and some of them will be bad, and we can reject ideas. But first, let them just think of ideas. What the scene could look like if they have to describe a scene. The planning stage is with an eye to writing. So how do we plan and organize that? So how many paragraphs do we want? Where are we going to start? For example, in a story, the timeline that we use might so we can use a timeline, another visual aid. There'll be a series of events in chronological order. You might want to start. So that's the plan. Ideas. Planning is putting the ideas in some kind of order, and then organizing is how we're going to structure it in terms of the writing in terms of paragraphs. Okay. Another question from Neha or Nera. Yeah. So is there a specific number of model texts needed to help learners understand the draft of the text? I mean, it depends on I suppose it depends on the difficulty, and also the familiarity. I tend to find, for example, nowadays that a lot of my students are very familiar with reviews, write-ups, because they read them a lot, as consumers. I suppose it's this idea. A lot of my students are older, and so that they're used to that kind of looking at product reviews or looking at film reviews before they go out and see the film, or even watching the video, the YouTube video of somebody who's got a new phone, or the unboxing idea that they can take. So they're very familiar with those kinds of texts, but other texts they might not be familiar. So we want them to look at more. Maybe we want to present more models. It also, I suppose, depends on the number of different types of text that we're trying to get them to write. Obviously one, but I wouldn't overdo it either. So maybe 2 or 3 for particularly different texts, or maybe ask them to go out and find their own. If they have a internet connection, find a review. I've done that too. Find a review of a book, or a film, and bring it in and share it with the rest of the class if they can, and that's a nice idea too. You have a question from well, that's quite a difficult name. Oh, okay. Well, the question is on evaluation, how to evaluate writing tasks, which is, yeah, we have to evaluate on so many different levels, don't we? And in this case, I very often turn to assessment groups like Cambridge Assessment, for example. They have they publish criteria for evaluation for foreign language learners, for example. So the Cambridge assessment for EFL, for example, for advanced or for certificate or IELTS, that's all available online, and it's easy to find. Normally what they evaluate is, I'll see if I can remember this off the top of my head, is what they call communicative achievement or task achievement. That is, did the student achieve what we asked them to do in terms of communicative task? Keeping the reader interested, using correct structure, etc. Structure and organization is another aspect that we should evaluate. Is it correctly organized, structured? The layout, the format, if it's a formal letter, did they write that correctly? And then in terms of language, spelling, punctuation, grammar, vocabulary. For example, we might have, did they use a wide variety of words to express the same idea? So evaluating in terms of achievement of the community tasks, I would say, did they do the right thing? Did they write the right genre? Is it interesting? Then in terms of structure and organization, they're the kind of usual structures. Then historical writing. That's an interesting question. Historical writing. I think you've stumped me there. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I even know what you mean by that. Perfectly honest, I'm not going to go into there. So no, yeah, I don't know. Sorry. Then there's we have a question about write-ups, which I think we talked about, reviews and things, and there's a question about typical structures that's used, typical sentence structures that use. I mean, obviously, the idea that we have in writing a write-up is you can kind of apply the same structure. That is, even if it's a restaurant, or even if it's an app, or a book, or a film, or a particular kind of book, or a particular kind of film, we want them to tell us the basic information, the journalistic, who, where, when, what. Those questions should be answered right at the beginning. So we need to give them sentences that describe a particular place, or the different features of an app, or the different the sort of basic information about a book or a film, the setting, the director, the author, the actors, that kind of stuff in the beginning. And we need to teach them sentence structures to give their opinion. So different types of sentence structures, things like sentences, sentences. So what I particularly enjoyed about this place or about this film is giving their opinion, in my view, in my opinion, and making it clear. We want our students to give clear opinions, and then pointing out flaws, something I didn't like. So without being too direct, so we want hedging devices, things like it seemed to me that that the film in question needed more pace, or something like that. Whatever it is they and then some concluding remarks in a write-up, for example. There's always a recommendation. So we need to teach students to use structures of recommend. I would highly recommend this restaurant app, book, film. We have another question from Gia, so about imagination, you know, and you know we do often complain that our students have no imagination, they can't think of things, and it is that can be a problem, especially particular statistics require a lot of imagination, say a story or a particular character or an interesting place. I think getting students to work together, to bounce ideas off each other. I think everyone has everyone has ideas, and very often we mistake the lack of ideas with maybe the fact that they don't dare to shout them out in class. So when we get them to work in smaller groups together, pairs first, or as I said, that brainstorming pyramid, that sort of inverted triangle, let's get them working on their own, think of ideas, help them with visual aids or help them with questions, and bouncing ideas off another student, and then working in smaller groups. So we're building up these ideas, and then the whole class. By the time we get to that whole class, then they should have lots of ideas. And then the sentence that we have, shorter sentences. This is something that with the students that I teach, I find exactly the same thing, that very often students mistake good writing for long, long complex sentences, and it is a typical thing. And I teach academic writing at university as well. That's a big thing. Students who are writing their master's or doctoral thesis who think that these big long sentences of an entire paragraph, single sentence. And first of all, I think you have to point out, English doesn't work like that. Sentences tend to be short, and I think in certain genre, shorter sentences are much more effective, in terms of creating tension in a story. Short sentences, pauses, things like that. So what I have very often do is I take sentences from my students' writing. I put them up on the board. Say, how can we break this down? Where do we want to divide this up? So simply telling them. In English, we don't use big long sentences. I often say to students, 3 clauses is max. Don't write more than 3 clauses. 1, because it's just enough, and 2, because the more clauses you write, the more likely you are to make mistakes. Simple as that. So even asking them to write in a particular style, so say write a story full of drama and tension, and write short sentences. Make them write short sentences. So give them a word limit. Try say, okay, you're not allowed to write sentences of more than 5 words, or more than 8 words, or more than 10 words, and do different activities. So the difference, we have a question here from Paritra, I think. Is that what's the difference in writing a book review and a movie review? First of all, I think in terms of the typical reviews that we want our students to write, the first, obviously, the difference will be in the first part, not in the second part. So let's say the description of a book will have information about, because we want our students to provide basic information about what they've read or seen. So the book will provide information about the author, about the plot of the book, maybe even things like length. That's an issue. whereas a film will go into other aspects of when it was released, who the director is, who the actors are, who the main characters are. That could also come up in a book. There'll be differences at that level, but in the rest of it, I think it's kind of the same. They have to, they still have to write a summary of the plot without giving away anything. So main characters, where it's set. In the case of a film, they'll have to obviously, talk about acting and um, directing, maybe photography, photography, things like that, where they won't talk about the things. But the second part, where they're getting into giving their opinion, that will be the same. Where they're pointing out flaws, that will probably be the same as well. And then in the end, in the recommendation, I mean, I teach students write reviews, and I say it's the same structure. Answer the basic questions at the beginning, then get into giving your opinion, and then recommendation or not. Specific topics or areas to prepare for vocabulary. I think this is a question from Gita. I think model text help, in that sense, modeling. So if we present students with a couple of models, and we can analyze the types of vocabulary that they use. So in a description, we might want to point out vocabulary of, adjectives, color, shape, size, age, those kinds of things. In a review, we might want to look at, for example, words to describe the action, gripping, exciting, dull, boring, the opposite as well. And so by looking at example text models, we can point words out and say, look at the way the author has described the action, or so sorry, I got a bit distracted. So look at the pointing, by using model text, we're pointing out the way authors do a particular thing. So in a description, what adjectives they use, in an essay, what the structures, what vocabulary they use for a particular so giving your opinion or things like that. So I think and there are plenty of resources for building students' vocabulary. You maybe look at EFL books, English as a foreign language, vocabulary books, which normally they do teach by specific areas, and they can be very helpful. Here's another question. This one here. So some students find it difficult to write poetry analysis, and end up retelling, So how can we help them to understand the difference and strengthen one over the other? So we're asking them to analyze a poem, and they're just kind of retelling what's in the poem. That's that's very specific. I think we need to get them to focus on to pull them away from that retelling. So by presenting them with a structure, using a visual aid, perhaps using a table or a set of boxes, or even that kind of idea where these boxes will represent different paragraphs. So what are we going to put in each paragraph? And in the planning stage, using visual aids, I think will help. So to get them looking at what they're going to put in each paragraph, so that that the retelling part will only be in the beginning, right? We only want them to give them sort of basic details about the poem, and then later on in subsequent paragraphs, analyzing their, giving their opinion, their thoughts, etc. Or a paragraph analysis, so that we take them through the poem, and then telling them within the paragraph divide up the paragraph into different parts. So retell maybe at the beginning of the paragraph what the next verse is about, maybe, and then asking them to tell us what that means. Okay, so verse meaning, verse meaning, verse meaning. That's another, that would be another way that I would approach that particular task. So there's a question here about flaws. What do we mean by flaws? We're grade 5 students. I think I'll sorry, I'll skip that question. Sorry, I don't know. Sorry, I'm going to just read a question off another screen here. How do we plan writing activity if the gap in comprehension between students is very big? Do we adjust the activity to the majority, or plan several different tasks? Yeah, multiple. Yeah, that mixed ability classrooms can be really, really challenging. And I think it is very tricky. I think we kind of have to value everyone's contribution differently, you know. And I think sometimes I think on the other end of the scale, I think sometimes we do just have to kind of leave a few people, you know, just kind of go with the good, you know, with the good ones, and let them and encourage them onwards, and then the pieces of, when there's a big gap between better student, best student, and the worst student. I think some of these techniques like modeling and visual aids can help. I also think, for example, putting good students, let's call them that, just to sort of save time, you know, putting the stronger students with the weaker students, putting them together, working together, can also help, so that, you know, students are kind of that peer learning thing, or dividing up the class into different groups, so the stronger group of students may be working together. They will usually be more autonomous. They'll usually work on their own, and then you can pay more attention to the weaker students. But yeah, that is a very difficult situation. Mixed ability classrooms can be really hard. But maybe, you know, mixing up, you know, putting them together, separating them together again, and then to visualize. So here's a question from Hira about making students more creative between the ages of 7 and 9. Right. First of all, I have to confess, I don't teach a lot of 7-year-olds, 9-year-olds. But I think at that age, you know, you want that pictures can be great, you know, picture stories. And I think, you know, nowadays, if we have access to the internet, they can be quite easy to find. Even you know, if we want them to write a story, for example, a simple task like that, you know, easily find pictures to help them, put together a story for them in pictures. Or we can ask them to do it themselves if they have, you know, if they have access to computers. You know, we can ask them to take, you know, find, say, 4 pictures that together that will tell a story, and then getting them to do that. One fun activity that I often do is to take a sheet of paper, and you can do this in kind of smaller groups, and if you fold it kind of like this into a kind of fan, so that students are only looking at sort of this one piece. Okay, so you give them a story to write, you know, say write a story about an animal who gets lost, or something like that, right? And so they you get one student to write the beginning of the story. The next student can only see that previous sentence, and then they have to write the following sentence. And then the next student can only see the that second sentence, so they don't read the whole story. They're just writing about what they've just read. So we continue the story like that, and then when we have the full story, we can compare the beginning and the end. So so if they said, once upon a time there was a seal who got lost, and the story might go in a completely different direction, and it's kind of fun to where we've just taken them on a big adventure. Yeah. Okay. So I think that's it. I think we've dealt with all the questions. I hope you've enjoyed the talk. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thanks for all your great questions, and just to wish you the best of luck with your writing, and say goodbye. Thank you very much.